Okay, I'm back on stage and we'll do the final stretch of the day. Can I ask Filomena, Alberto, Johnny, Francesca, Joanna to join? Okay, please all join. And Amber, fabulous. It doesn't matter. And Brando, my goodness. The Italians are always the most difficult to catch. You write emails, they don't respond. Some non-Italians. Okay, so this is the big final discussion on digital and AI, which of course has come after the crescendo of the previous discussion. We had the benefit of Roberto Viola, and then of course I love the discussion between Daron and Eric. This is the stuff that you get only here, incidentally, because this kind of level of economists speaking to an antitrust audience is unheard of. So I think we should treasure, these moments, because their insights are always incredible. So this panel is titled "The Great or the Grand Regulation Experiment" that Europe, of course, is embarked on, both with the DMA, the DSA, the Data Act, and now with the AI Act. So, in a sense, we'll split the discussion in part in two, because the DMA is in the throes of its implementation, and then we will move along to talk about AI Act, which, of course, is in a much further back sort of stage. We really are not anywhere near yet implementation. But I want to start with Filomena and Alberto, respectively, of course, from Connect and DG Comp, very much DMA enforcement task force, if I'm correct. So clearly you are at this point in the final stages of at least the process that leads to the submission of these compliance reports that you have, of course, discussed with the actors over the last few months. They will be submitted early March, and then there will be your assessment and your evaluation. Clearly, you cannot express views at this point on any particular player, on any particular issue, but it would be useful for the audience, I think, to get your reflection about what kind of issues are you facing, where are the really knotty points, where are you hopeful that things can be making progress, where do you think cooperation, and inevitably there will be challenges in court that will happen. We expect them to be there. There will be possibly non-compliance decisions, just respectively, and I'm sure you will have divided the labor between the two of you, but we are very keen to hear. Thank you.
Do I start? Yeah. Then we share the replies to your inquiries. First of all, I would say there are two things, and I think you presented it a bit in this way. We are in the lookout, or many people are in the lookout for non-compliance. Like, where is the blood? Where is the problem? I would say, like, we are also in the lookout for compliance, for things that work, because things are already happening. Announcements are being made. Some things probably are good. Some things probably are less good, or improvable, or perfectible. But things are already happening. But now, I think one question that we ask ourselves, and many people ask, is what does it mean actually to be compliant? And I would start from a general perspective about that, saying that since also Director General Viola recalled, the DSA, like the DMA in this case, is meant to correct problems that we have observed already, that means that compliance implies that change is happening. If status quo persists, then probably this is not really what we expect. If compliance solutions, therefore, are pushing towards maintenance of the status quo, perhaps we are not seeing what compliance should look like. So then I cannot go into details of all the different things, because also the DMA has different, of course, different regulations, different obligations, different elements that are specified. But a point that is very important and very relevant in the DMA is the fact that compliance should be assessed by objectives. If the objectives of the DMA are being effectively put into place, are concretizing, and it shouldn't be circumvention. So it's a complex reasoning that we are making, but I am confident, I think the team is confident that we can make this type of analysis with regard to that. Now, if I take back in this regard the example that Director General Viola made, the comparison with the telecom regulation, indeed there is something about in the DMA that is very similar to that framework, in the sense that if you think of telecom regulation as regulating operators that have control over their users, that's a bit the logic of the DMA as well. There are 2-3 telecom operators and they are subject to regulation. There are 3-4 gatekeepers and they are subject to certain type of regulation that are meant to free the access or open new venues to access to their users. So also Chairwoman Linehan said the feeling of coercion that you feel when you are in a situation like in a situation where you have a gatekeeper. So the DMA in a way is there to free the users from this feeling of coercion. Feeling of coercion, if it leaves the user, then it means that the user has more choice and can decide to stay where they are or move to a different provider, to a different supplier of services. So I would say my feeling about the 7th of March, if it becomes some kind of choice day, because finally the users can actually have this, can exercise this choice as of 7th of March.
Thank you. Alberto?
Yeah, so the DMA goes live on the 7th of March. I know there is a lot of expectations, and there will be the compliance report, but perhaps more importantly, there will be the compliance. So things should really change. We saw a flurry of announcements so far. I think what will be extremely important for us is to understand there how the market reacts, how businesses react, and how users react, and how much this goes to complying with the goals of the DMAs. The DMA is talking about effective compliance, not just compliance on paper. And there we cannot talk about specifics, but certainly we can talk about categories. And I think there is a category of compliance solutions or proposals that we think are close to where they used to be. Maybe we are not yet there, but we can be, if not by the 7th of May, by soon after. There is some compliance solutions for which we will know only when we see it working, because we may be, we may have some doubts, but maybe it works. And then we will need to see really how businesses and users take advantage of the fairness and the contestability that are the goals of the DMA. And I must say there are also some solutions that have been proposed that we can say already now we don't think they comply with the law. And we will need to take action on those relatively quickly. So we will have to modulate our post-7th of May based on that. But we will not just do it alone as the European Commission. We need the crucial feedback of businesses. And on this, actually, we have also invited all gatekeepers to explain their solutions in a public workshop that will take place a few weeks after, after the 7th of March, where they can actually not only hand in the public version of a compliance report, but actually explain what they do and explain why it does meet the needs or the requirements of the regulation and why actually it will lead to compliance solutions. So the invitations are out. We have received some positive responses. Others are
That's interesting. Will it be a scenario in which the gatekeepers give their solution, but is there going to be real pushback on the part of the companies that are effectively on the other side? I'm saying this because already there is, in the public domain, no secret, companies expressing quite strongly disagreement with what appeared to be some of the early proposal, not the formal proposal, but the early indications of the proposal. And then what will be the dynamic after that? So you have this meeting and everybody shouts at each other, and then what do you do? How do you take it forward?
But we hope not. I think
that's nice.
That's
a bit of shouting.
Not always productive, though. And but it's we hope to have a good conversations. If gatekeeper propose certain solution, they must be convinced that these are good solutions, and they cannot be in a vacuum. They must be convinced and convincing. So that's the only way to be convincing. I think it's an opportunity. We also see announcements, and we see very quick reactions from some. Stakeholders. Others may have an opinion, they have not come out yet, they may not be as vocal. We would like to provide a forum that actually gives a fair chance to everybody to profess their opinion. But I think what is crucial for us, and that's something we've been repeating since the very, very beginning, there is no DMA implementation in a bilateral conversation between the Commission and the gatekeepers. I think gatekeepers saw this coming. I hope they will meet this, this offer enthusiastically. But even if they decided not to, they will never be able to provide any solution in a vacuum. It just doesn't make much sense.
But in that, the conversation between the two sides, what is the Commission's position going to be? Are you going to mediate? Are you going to just say, well, I agree with this, I don't agree with that? I'm just interested in the process through which you converge somewhere.
We are there to listen. We did workshops now more than a year ago on thematic, not really on compliance for specific companies. And that was for us a forum to actually get the gatekeepers to talk to stakeholders and stakeholders to be able to give their opinion. There have been other workshops that have been taking place in the context of the discussion that we're having, sometimes closer, sometimes with a selected number. It was one of the most important ways for us to gather feedback. So we see it in that way. The role of the Commission will be to be there to moderate, but we are not there to pass a judgment at that point in time. All that is for us is very precious information. And then if we have to take a decision, we have to do it with the proper channels within the DMA.
What's the timeline, for example, for a non-compliance decision? After that workshop, you will consider it yourself, and then if you still...
Difficult to say in terms of days, but I think if there are elements that we think are not complying with the letter and the spirit of the DMA, irrespective of the way that actually it could be applied, then I think it needs to be very quick. So if we are convinced that there is no room for that to be complying, it needs to be.
What is the formal, remind me, what's the formal deadline for example, after the compliance reports are in? What's the formal deadline for there isn't one, for a non-compliance decision?
Compliance is an obligation on gatekeepers, and non-compliance is the tool for the Commission to investigate first and then, if necessary, sanction non-compliance, or also to indicate how actually compliance should happen. But there is not a formal deadline. Once we start a compliance investigation, we have a 12-month period actually to establish non-compliance, with a 6-month period for preliminary findings.
Yeah, just to complete, we are not in a scenario where we have a black or white compliance and non-compliance. We have a scenario of an ongoing regulatory dialogue. So, and we have many different instruments in the DMA to go about it. And non-compliance proceedings is one. So we are convinced, or we have strong indications that there is a problem, and then we open non-compliance and we close it in endeavor to close it in 1 year. But we have other instruments. We have specific application decisions that we can take to fine-tune the way the obligation applies. We have the ongoing dialogue that we can have. It will also depend a lot on the attitude of the counterpart, if they are in a mood of cooperating or in a mood of confrontation. So but once again, it's not a one-shot, it's not a one-off. We are in for a longer dialogue.
There are other people on this panel who actually have opinion on the DMA and its implementation, and I don't want to leave you all sort of over there not saying anything. I want to enjoy, this is a conversation. I want to invite you to comment. Johnny, Joanna, Amber, please jump in and let's have a discussion.
Oh yeah, good, I've hit the button. So I'm going to depart from the remarks I planned to make, and I'm going to return to something that we were reminded about this morning at almost the very beginning. And that was when FTC Commissioner Slaughter just briefly referred to the President's executive order. I want to read out sentence 1 to you, after the initial paragraph saying this is an executive order. This is from part of sentence 1. Excessive market concentration threatens basic economic liberties, democratic accountability, and the welfare of workers, farmers, small business, startups, and consumers. It's a good way to start. Now, it's not the starting point taken by the Director General of DG Comp. I won't have a go at you both. I like you. But I think his remarks were infamous. I want to return to them. I'm a survivor of 2 startups, not 1, but 2 nascent, innovative competitors. And we were in markets that really were not contestable. And I'm also a survivor of a great newspaper that's trying to survive in a rigged advertising market. The idea of incremental change is not adequate. We're past that, surely. What we've heard today is a broad agenda: innovation, security, resilience, choice, power, disinformation, freedom, justice, democracy. Whichever one you pick, the stakes are high and the stakes are inescapably clear. So with the stakes so incredibly high, we must make sure, this isn't just about this panel, but I think as a general call to action, despite the infamous remarks we heard from the very top of DG Comp, we have to make sure that the next Commission does not regard its job with competition as merely a side dish.
Joanna?
Yeah, well, I would first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is my first experience of the event at all, let alone on stage. Thanks for it so much. And you asked me to talk about ethics. I think it's because it's in the title. I got a title, Ethics and Technology, Professor of Ethics and Technology, that brought me to Berlin. And I came to Berlin to be a part of to continue being a part of the EU process. I had been in the UK before that. I am super excited about the DSA and the DMA. I've been at UNESCO meetings where the whole world, including the US, who weren't even in the UNESCO right then, were saying how important this experiment is. They're so excited and they're so scared. We are waiting to see whether enforcement can happen. This is radical change. And I do worry that I agree with you. Some people really filled me with hope today and some people filled me with despair and fear. When people don't respect the incredible progress and the incredible things that are being attempted right now in the EU, it does worry me. And I really, really love, I also want to elevate some of the stuff that was said earlier today about that we have to think globally. We have to think about, there's a new phrase now that for one of the scare words we can't say anymore. Now we say dissemination, the dissemination of gains. I love that expression, right? But we do have to think about people getting what they're due, right? So I was at first skeptical about the DMA. I was like, why don't we fix whatever is going wrong with DG Comp? But then I went to a meeting about it, and I got really excited about this as an agile strategy. One of the things we're seeing is that it is easier and easier using technology to do really complicated things, make strings of shell companies, do all this evasion, the tax evasion we were hearing about. We have to be able to do those complicated things with respect to governance, but we have to make it transparent because we require legitimacy. But we can do that. We just have to do these things. You're looking at me. I don't know how long all the people down at this end get, but I just want to say that there are a couple things that have really filled me with hope. I mean, honestly, when the COVID thing happened and we got through it, I mean, people's livelihoods were destroyed and lots of people died, and I don't want to make a light of that. But given the scale of it, how strong we got through, I was a little worried that, wow, maybe ordinary people don't matter anymore. What happened here? But then something happened that I think is under-celebrated. The Ukraine war, which I don't want to celebrate, but at the beginning of that, we wanted to cut off. We had been betrayed by Russia. We, Germany, had been betrayed by Russia. We wanted to cut off the money flows we were sending them. Could we make it without Russian gas and oil? No, couldn't possibly. Suddenly, that was gone. We made it. We made it with barely a downturn. We changed our entire power structure. The LGN came through. Every factory did it. There's a 20% reduction of energy. That was industry and civil society, right? I think artificial intelligence has given us a capacity, a latent capacity for change. And while people think that AI is only large language models, they're missing the boat. We all have had, there's been a big question the economists have been asking for decades about where's the productivity gain you would expect, given all these incredible tools we've had in the last decades. I think in biology we talk about it in terms of phenotypic plasticity. You can use it to actually keep things looking the same when actually they've changed a lot, but then if something really triggers it, then you can make the explosive change. So I'll wrap up here saying we did that, and we can do it again.
Francesca, this is going to be a conversation that's going to be meandering, part because it's the end of the day, but that is what I enjoy. And I think just bear with these people because they're the smartest around. Just go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me? Yeah. Do I need to apologize? We are many Italians on the panel.
No,
Too many Italians on the panel. Yeah, applause. I don't apologize. No, I first wanted to say that I've been here since very early this morning. And for me, it was very refreshing, actually, to see some of the views. For example, Lina Khan, of course, but also Ambassador Tai. And I think I'm much more optimistic, actually, after today about the possible cooperation between definitely Europe and the US in our capacity to look at the economy and technology in a much more strategic, forward-looking way, in a sense that really should serve the people. So I was pretty much, and maybe this is also, I think, a conversation here, because if we want to make competition, antitrust more relevant, I think we have to look at the economy in a way that we really understand, who are the people that we want to serve and how this is really going to matter for citizens, for workers, for small businesses. So this was very, very important. And I also think that it's broader than that, because actually it's not only competition and antitrust, but it's also, as we heard, industrial policy, trade. So for me, what I take away is we need a post-neoliberal and even post-globalization. We are in a post-neoliberal and post-globalization world, and we have to use our tools entirely in a much more strategic way. And this means that probably people that do competition and antitrust and people that do industrial policy, they have to talk to each other much more. So we need multidisciplinary teams much more. So when before Roberto was talking about the AI office, I thought, okay, we don't only need computer scientists there. We definitely need the economists. We definitely need people that understand maybe taxation. We need people that understand social cohesion and what really matter, economists and so on. So we need a combination of things. And let me also say, I think there is the big elephant in the room. First of all, not many people understand what's the core of the problem with the digital economy. Why these oligopolies don't deliver for people. Not many of the, maybe antitrust experts or industrial policy experts. And another elephant in the room, for Europe, let's say it, Europe needs an industrial policy that's forward-looking and that really serves European people, because yes, we are too dependent on these big tech firms. We don't have a European stack that aligns with our values, with our democratic principles, and that really maybe can deliver on what European people need. And I think this is obvious, I mean, with everything, with chips, with cloud, with AI, with data. So we do need an industrial policy, but what kind of industrial policy we need? Sorry to move a bit, because I think this is very important. And first of all, what kind of maybe conditionalities we can have in this industrial policy. For example, Europe has Next Generation EU, which are common funds with European common debt, that have to deliver on the digital and green transition. Are we putting conditionalities, for example, when it comes to minimum salary, when it comes to the green transition, when we give money to companies, when we give subsidies to companies, and when it comes to data, maybe we can put conditionalities about interoperability, about open standards, privacy and ethics by design, and about the ownership of this data. So you know, Christina, that I've been working for a long time on, let's say, a more public interest agenda for Europe. You know, public interest meaning that I think in this room we all think that our digital future is going to be big tech on one side, and that's where the Silicon Valley model is, and maybe the big state where China is, yes, like a big state which gathers all the data, the social credit scoring and so on. And I think we are trapped maybe in these two models, and I think we need institutional imagination, because actually maybe here in Europe we can design new type of infrastructure and institutions, digital public infrastructures and institutions that can deliver real value, real public value to people. For example, as I've done in cities, how about urban data that we tackle to fight climate change, to make our cities greener, or even, you know, to deliver better public services to citizens? How about this being kept in a data trust that's owned by citizens? This is another model, for example. And then how about the question of public participation? Like, you know, we are in an election year. I mean, I will really close. I keep going because I think this question of participation and political participation, public participation of people, and the question of disinformation, misinformation, fake news, polarization on social media. Why do we have this? Because this is the core of the business model of digital platform, manipulation of our personal information and data. And we have talked about it. I mean, this is toxic. This is something, I mean, Lina Khan said it absolutely brilliant. How about we transform that? Because we do need political participation and people to engage, because we want to mobilize the talent of people. And that's where I want to get to say that when we say public interest, we don't mean state control. We don't mean that it has to be state control versus corporate control. No, we mean that we want to have infrastructures that are able to mobilize people, activate people, mobilize the talent of people with public return. And maybe we have to, you know, create infrastructure that allow for political participation, but where the data is kept as a common good, as a digital commons. Can Europe pioneer on the design of these new types of technology? And for me also, I want to add, because I was really touched when I heard the speeches today, that in this conversation maybe, and we can be relevant even if we think about the next European elections. I mean, think about that, this conversation about how AI will transform society. It will transform healthcare. And we talk about healthcare workers, and we know in Europe how this is important because we have an effective public healthcare system. But now we have a lot of doctors and nurses which are complaining about, you know, cuts in public spending on healthcare. It will transform education. It will transform, the way we live in cities and so on. We need those stakeholders on board. I mean, this is going to be a conversation. Otherwise, we're going to get the farmers protesting. We're going to get, Europe blocked. And then, yes, we see the rise of populism and the far right. And that's, I think, what we want to prevent. And that's why I think we need a public interest agenda where Europe can take the lead and show that there is also another model for innovation that really benefit people and the workers.
That's perfect, and really I wanted Francesca to be on this panel because she organized a terrific event at the European Parliament that Johnny also spoke at, which I found inspirational because there was a huge number of people there I'd never met before. They were completely outside the antitrust bubble, but they were creative and engaged with a vision of alternative. The reason I called this panel also what is our theory of change is that I think, as Francesca says, there is one lane, which is, okay, we got the tech giants, and we need to do something about it. And this is the job that Alberto and Filomena are deeply engaged in, and it is important work, and Godspeed. But then the alternative or the parallel path is one that says, okay, but what if? What if this work, however good and well-intentioned, doesn't go as far as we need, per Johnny's point? It doesn't disperse the power. It doesn't address the issues that are more existential and we struggle with. Is there an alternative theory of change that is going to be a possible other path? And what Francesca is referring to is potentially public investment into some sort of infrastructure that is alternative and parallel to what we have. Let me just move on to, instead of speechifying, move on to Amba, who's a real expert in this field. And amongst many things, you, of course, have written and spoken at length about AI, but one of the recent initiatives and the pieces of work that you are connected with is this piece of work which looks at AI, public investment, and industrial strategy that is very recent and very of the moment. Maybe you can also talk to us about this in this spirit.
Yes, I think Rana fairly assumed that hers was the last AI panel, but we're back. There's more. I'll start by saying that, just to respond to Francesca's remarks, I think there are many of you in the room that might feel this exact way about the minutiae of the DMA, but I think what you said to me is really energizing and opens up the horizon and creates breathing space when there hasn't been much for a long time now. So the last few weeks have actually been big weeks for what we are starting to term as AI industrial policy, right? So just last week we had the European Commission announce the innovation package, which is sort of, I think close to 3 billion euros towards startups, particularly in the generative AI market. In the US, where we are based, the NSF has announced a pilot for the National AI Research Resource, or NARE. The original proposal was, again, 2.6 billion over 6 years. These are all essentially public investment AI projects, although of varying varieties. And I think there's a sort of a few kind of caution to kind of flag early in this process, especially as we are seeing governments all over the world really ramp up public investment in AI. And this is not just the US and the EU, it's also the UAE, it's also India. So the first is just the narrative, right? If you saw the reporting on the EC innovation package, I saw a random assortment of 3 headlines. It was Europe is telling the world it doesn't just regulate, it innovates. Or, Europe is turning its back on regulation and looking forward to innovation. And I think that this is really, really troubling to see the narrative of regulation as an innovation killer, which we thought we had left firmly behind, sort of come back into vogue at a time when we know we are surrounded by, an extreme wave of hype and kind of inflated valuation. So I think that's one thing, is sort of really setting the record straight that industrial policy and regulation, if we even are to regard these as separate categories are both shaping innovation trajectories in ways that, or should shape innovation trajectories in ways that prioritize broader public interests over narrow commercial interests. So that's one. I think the other big piece of this, and this goes to kind of what we've discussed all day, which is like, what is the connection between these public investments and concentration of power? Because the thesis, particularly that animating the NAIR project in the US, but I think similar with the EC innovation package, is that we're democratizing AI. And I think with respect to where these projects are, I think there's a question of just scale to contend with, that these projects are sort of unintentionally drawing attention to. One is that, as we're talking about 3 billion and 2.6 billion, Amazon, at the end of last year announced that they are, sorry, not Amazon, Microsoft, I think, that they are investing. I might, if I'm getting this wrong, someone can fact check me later. It's one of the two is investing $35 billion in upgrading their data centers in Virginia alone, right? So I think there's a sort of uneasy feeling about playing this infrastructure and scale game on the terms that have been set by industry. But maybe what is even more worrying, and I think this is exactly what Francesca was getting to, is that the scope and really the vision for this project, for these initiatives, also seem to be in many ways on terms that are set by industry. So, the NAIR project that I mentioned, an initial formulation was actually structured as a cloud licensing arrangement, where we would, it would be a world where we were seeing public money repatriated back to cloud companies, right, in the name of like AI for good. The current version looks at compute and data credits and other ways that these AI companies will contribute to the public initiative and then therefore democratize AI, I guess the argument goes. But I think like we need to be worried because companies like OpenAI and Anthropic and other big tech companies all have been given kind of say over really like what the innovation trajectory will be, and to make the implicit explicit everything about the current trajectory of AI is really, it sort of neatly aligns with tech company interests. I mean, to Eric's point in the last session, it doesn't need to be that way, but the bigger is better paradigm works best for these particular interests. So I think before we get too comfortable with the idea of public investment in AI, it's a really good time to ask why and what is the alternative vision that undergirds all of this before we kind of.
Joanna, you want to jump in?
I realize it's totally not my term. Sorry, person next to me. But this narrative drives me insane, right? I mean, they are grabbing the narrative, and so many people on this stage were echoing a false narrative. These large models, they don't make money. Yes, they made $1 billion. They lost $15 billion in building it, right? The vast majority of AI is this smaller, like Eric said something about, it's interesting that, these companies with small amounts of data, maybe it's because the data is more local. No, it's not because of that. It's because for most problems, you do not need that large of a model. And so they're grabbing the narrative, they're trying to make it into a big deal. We all see these nice things that can hallucinate, cleanly and fluently when you ask it to make a prediction off of too little data, which is ultimately what people wind up doing anyway. But there is so much else we could be doing with it. And I just, this narrative, like even grabbing the word AI and thinking it applies only to this thing that's a year old, in your minds. That is not AI. Let me tell you what I was taught AI was: search. Guess who doesn't want you to think that AI is search and search is AI? But that is what you get taught in like CS 101, right? So, but Microsoft, every product they have is infused with AI. And then they get OpenAI, their unannounced merger, right, to get up and say, we want you to regulate us so nobody else comes near us because we spent so much money on this. But don't regulate any of that other kinds of AI because that would hurt SMEs. You mean like Microsoft, who is actually paying your $15 billion bill? Sorry to rant.
I want to just get Brando in the conversation because, of course, your perspective is clearly someone who's been in the weeds of the negotiation, of the back and forth, and it's kind of done but not yet done. We heard Roberto Viola on it, but please give us your history and where you think we're going with this.
Well, it's not so easy because so many stimulating things have been said, and I could go in many directions. But maybe I can also connect to one thing I just heard on the issue of the fact that the big developers of AI have tried in some way, they tried also during our work on this regulation in Europe, to in some way trying to write their own rules for the most powerful models, for the most famous LLMs that we know. They have been skeptical of the direction that in the end we took, that we do not leave the most powerful models only to self-regulation, but rather we are putting some a box where, in fact, as we are talking about frontier technologies, we also need to do some dialogue and some constant exchange with those that develop the models, but we also didn't accept the idea that we cannot put any rules on the safety of this kind of models, and this is what we had to decide when working on this. It was one of those 15-hour final strikes of negotiations. One was that, one was the prohibitions and the use of biometrics and etc. As you all know, this big story of the long negotiation. But I think that we are finally there. There are just a few steps more that I think will be, to be frank, I said that with some friends from the press here when I arrived, that I said it from day one. There was no way that for small details this could be stopped. So maybe I don't know, I hope I'm not over-optimistic, but I see it in the right track. In the next days, we have some important steps to finalize the AI Act and for it to become a law. Then I think it's very important to underline that we are trying to, in some way, I think, learn from the errors of the past and be very careful in accompanying the compliance with this exercise of an anticipated voluntary compliance. I'm sometimes a bit surprised by some discourses I hear that, well, we take a long time for this law to become applicable, and so it will become obsolete, it will become a problem, I mean, something that has no sense. I think this is a misguided point of view, because today, all over the world, there are only recommendations, codes of conduct, voluntary proposals. So what we do now is that from April, realistically, maybe even March, we will have our set of recommendations that, unlike the rest of the world, we say at some point they become mandatory. This is the reality. So, because it's true, at the beginning, this law will not be fully mandatory. The first thing will be the prohibitions, then the transparency and the big models, and then finally, the whole system of the high risk. But when I hear, it's something that will kick in too late, I think we forget that we need the standards, so it needs time, but also let's look at the rest of the world. No one in the rest of the world is saying, at some point, my voluntary scheme is becoming mandatory. This is what we are doing. The clock will be ticking, and we will accompany the institutions and the public sector and the private sector to this compliance, when it will become at some point mandatory, with fines, with an enforcement that will be with the AI office that you also heard about before. I have to say that after this work, I became more convinced that we really need to be clear on the fact that we need international cooperation to pursue some safety objectives. Because we tried, I said it at the beginning, to put some safety requirements for most powerful models. We call them general purpose AI with systemic risk in the final text. But that's the only part where we depart partly, sorry for the game of words, we partly depart from the risk-based approach, use case-based approach that is the way the whole regulation works on. We focus more on a technology in that case, but that's a small exception. But we do not go over that. And instead, if I look at the big debates ongoing about global risks of AI, on cybersecurity, on weaponization of AI, as we were talking about our theory of governance and of change, then we cannot do that on Europe, and then maybe with the transatlantic dialogue, maybe G7, that's not enough in my view. I think we really need to work over. It's okay that now G7 will be in Italy with AI also as a focus. That will be important. We had the London, the Bletchley Park conference, and we will have new moments for that. But I think we need to go more and more global, and the EU can pave the way for some of this reflection. But really, I think, and on this, I believe the big founders of big AI enterprises, some of them were mentioned in the previous interventions, they are right when some of them, Sam Altman, for example, say that we need this kind of global governance for AI. On the other hand, and I conclude my reflection on this, we have been always a bit wary. I said it as a legislator working on this for more than 1 year, of focusing only on the global systemic risk, because we have seen that this could become a way not to deal with the domestic daily risks that are at the heart of our regulation. This is what we have been doing. And finally, I want to say that with the issue of the sandboxes and with the issue of the transparency obligations for downstream operators that we have put in our law, I think we are doing our part, or at least we made a contribution in these parts of the regulation for a proper competition, because the risk of access to data being too concentrated, of market relevance and the role of the incumbents, I think could hinder a healthy competition also in our continent for the development of new AI business models. And I think the regulation also deals a bit with that in some of the parts. For sure, we need to be competitive also globally, to do much more than only regulating. And this is, to be frank, I need to say it as the politician on the panel, this is about political will. You know, the appeals from the scientific community, for example, in Europe, to do more in terms of sharing of the computing power. Or, for example, the issue of having a more complete financial market, capital markets union, also for financing AI. I think this is about the political will. And this is something that I think is crucial if Europe wants to compete with China and US on the same footing, and it cannot be forgotten. Thank you.
Great. Did you want to say something?
Just a comment, because I feel humbled and overwhelmed by the rest of the panel, because we were talking about implementation of a piece of legislation from our perspective of day-to-day interaction with companies and with concrete obligations that they have to fulfill. That made me think a lot about our work, and triggered a couple of reflections on that regard. And the first is perhaps in line with what Joanna was saying, that as a European now, before an enforcer, I'm proud of the courage that the European legislator has been able to have to deliver the first AI framework, but also the first framework for reining in the big tech, which are on the radar of everyone. And when we feel we are accused of being protectionist because we don't have big tech in Europe, I mean, is it only Europe talking about power of big tech, or is it actually everywhere? And we have half of the audience here is from the country where most big tech are coming from. So it's a general problem, and Europe had the courage to take it in its hand. That's as a European. And I was in these mysterious esoteric things called trilogues in my previous position. So I can tell you at the end of discussion with the Parliament and the Council, everybody was really proud of the DSA and the DMA agreement to begin with. And I'm sure it was the same for the AI Act where Brando was present. But as an enforcer now, I am the humble enforcer. I have a mandate from the European legislator to do certain things. And this is framed, the boundaries of my action are framed in the letter of the law. This is the outer bound of what I can do. So I probably would love to do something more. I would contribute more. I wouldn't say to the farmers' problems, but maybe to bigger issues. But the DMA in particular, which is what we are working on, is very framed. So, but it still does a lot. It does a lot of things. If the point Francesca was making, coordinating with industrial policy has been a kind of curse word for a long time. But actually, in the good sense and in the way you are referring to it, it's also having a trajectory for innovation, a trajectory for market developments. And here, the DMA, I believe, is contributing precisely to this. It's opening holes maybe in the walled gardens that we have witnessed so far. It's not just breaking down the walls and say like there are no walls and now everybody's free to go, but it's opening holes in which innovators with good ideas can go through and do something else finally that was not possible before. Or as a user, I can say, I don't want my data to be in the big pool of the data of this or that gatekeeper. Others might say, actually, I'm happy about that. I like the advertising that I get. It is really for me. So it's, I was trying to say before, not as eloquently as my co-panelists, choice. That's why I call it choice date. From now on, I want to have a choice as a user now, not an enforcer anymore. I go back to me being a humble European. I like to have a choice. I might want to stay where I am because I like certain services as they are, or I want to do something else. I want to explore. I want to see new things that are available out there, and I believe our work will deliver that.
No, and there's no question, I think, as a European, I feel enormously proud of the incredible democratic project that these laws have been. It's moving. I mean, frankly, we heard a lot of Americans today, and you can't pass a law for love of money. Nobody crosses the floor. And so nothing crosses the floor. At least, you know, that is, as a democratic project, is something that we can deliver. Let me go back to Johnny. You said you were thinking of saying something else, and then you veered into saying what you did, but I want to give you the opportunity of saying what you had planned to say in any event.
I mean, I deleted what I was going to say. But speaking
or anything else you might care to say.
Well, I do have a thought, and the thought is our American colleagues have visited us today, and they've said humility is important in learning methodologies and understanding past missed opportunities and evolving. But I'm not sure we want to see humility in the face of the regulated. I don't think that's what you meant. I'm not putting words in your mouth, but the thought of you being a humble enforcer or a humble European, I hope not, Philomena. I very much hope not.
Just be badass. That's what he means.
And I would expect, if I were an industry, and if I were pulling some of the tricks that these people are pulling, I wouldn't expect to be having nice conversations with you. I should fear you. And I hope I do.
Any other comments? Joanna, you are opinionated on these things.
I always have comments. Another great thing that you said before, I really loved that you brought up with Lina Khan, was this point that there's more to antitrust than just ensuring competition. That's the goal, where we can do it, that's great, it's really important. And by the way, we are already competitive with China and EU. Please look, if you Google my name and is there an AI Cold War? I did a paper with Helena Malikova only the US really stands as an outlier. Basically, we do have AI proportional to the amount of GDP we have, which is about a fifth of the world's GDP. Don't forget that the EU was the largest economy in the world from 2007 to at least 2009, right? And we might be back there again, depending on what happens in the US. So I think, it's not surprising that we could have some kind of regulatory force, just like it's not surprising that some other people are doing military force, right? We can provide stability. Anyway, sorry, that's digression. I want to go. The point is that, so we do have a lot of creativity, and I hope we keep nurturing that, and that's all great. But there are these things about scale. And I really hate it when people say, Google is American. As we heard, it's from Bermuda. No, it's or Ireland, right? Ireland? No, but seriously, it uses the world's talent, it uses the world's data, it uses, and it's getting money from all over the whole world, and it has fiber optic cables wrapping the entire world. It is a resource to the world. We would call this infrastructure. And the US has stopped enforcing its utility. I can't even find, I'm an academic, and I know I'm not an economist, but I can't find a recent article about how you recognize, identify utilities since about 1980. But as I understand it, what you're supposed to do is you go in, you say, okay, this is essential infrastructure. That the market is not going to be able to regulate that, and so the regulator has to regulate it harder. And then everything that isn't necessarily attached to that should be stripped off and flung to the market to regulate, right? Nobody is doing that. And this comes back to, again, this wonderful conversation this morning about national champions. We really have to wonder, why is it that the US has stopped enforcing its own law? And honestly, I think it might not be anything particularly more. Somebody celebrated the Thatcher-Reagan moments, like of tearing down the red tape or something. Maybe there was too much red tape, I don't know. But I do know that we didn't like Thatcher and Reagan at the time. and that it looked to me like people just cashing in because the Soviet Empire had fallen down. So I think we need to get back to dissemination of gains. Yeah.
Francesca and then Amber.
Yeah, I want to say a couple of things. So the first one is that maybe I want to stress and emphasize this even more as a European, why we are so much stressing the fact that critical infrastructures, that power essential services of society, which is at the core of the welfare state of Europe, of our social model, we struggle to see them in the hands of just private corporate players. Yes, because we are used to have public libraries, public schools, public, healthcare system, cities where cities still deliver essential services to citizens. Yes, this is at the very core of our European model. And that's why I think, here we're stressing the fact that we cannot shrink our imagination in the digital age so much not to have alternatives to the ones provided by the big tech, because they are not long-term. What do we do really if they're not sustainable, if citizens cannot afford it, if they switch off, if they crumble, as we're seeing happening, and if the business model isn't working? So I think, and that I want to stress why we also say we have to build capacity, we have to build also the capacity as a public sector capacity. I was also when Lina Khan said, okay, we are building in-house capacity even just to analyze what's happening over the AI stack. This is just, one thing that you need to build, like analytic capacity, but also capacity in terms of strengthening the link between universities, research centers, and industry, strengthening the link between public sector and businesses and universities and so on. I think we can do it in a way that's very particular, tailored to deliver what we need as Europeans. So I don't think, so we have to probably do it, get there, and that's where we need investment. That's where we need, if we want to get there, then we have to unleash more capacity, which also means fiscal capacity, of course, and that's also what Brando was referring to, but also, investment public and private, yes, in order to be able to achieve those big goals. And the last thing I want to say, just maybe someone can react, I was also a bit troubled because I used to be the president of the Italian Innovation Fund until 1 month ago. We had 5 billion that we mobilized on startups, innovators, the entire kind of innovation ecosystem. Well, what Lina Khan said about private equity entering in this space, or even just venture capital firm from big tech. I mean, if we are mobilizing in Europe, as we are doing France, Germany, Italy, the European Commission, many European countries, lots of money that we invest in equity also now as a kind of venture capital, public-driven venture capital to unleash private money operator for, innovators. But then, if we get it, if one startup succeeds, immediately it gets bought by the big tech companies, by sovereign wealth fund from, Middle East or so on, and we get them all over the stack and critical infrastructures, and also buying our startups. So we need a strategy also there, because otherwise we are spending all this public money. What is the return? And how do we make sure the wealth that we are mobilizing can really help us to achieve the transition we want to achieve? Build better infrastructure, better jobs, greening the economy, doing all the things we need to do. We are not able to do it if we don't have a strategy. So that's why I'm saying, and probably the problems are the same, because I've heard our American colleagues saying the same. So that's, back to your point about building a kind of strategic approach to how we mobilize all this, investments.
I'll give the word to Amber, but this is exactly what I had in mind when kind of constructing this set of conversations today, because there is the antitrust piece, and it's important, and we all believe it does stuff. But unless we combine that with, you want to call it an industrial strategy, you want to call it an industrial policy in which we make investments that are going to power up these alternatives, we are not getting out of the hole that we are in. You need both. Taming big tech is great, but it's not going to put points on GDP in and of itself. Now, on this, Amber.
Yeah, I have so many things I want to react to. I think maybe first, if I can come back to what Joanna was saying, because I do think there's some maybe conflation with national champions lobbying, which is absolutely happening in the US as it has for many years, and the fact that there has really been a concerted effort in this administration to distance from that. So I think the presidential EO on competition was very clear that the kind of answer to foreign monopolies is not to tolerate domestic ones. And then I think, putting money where the mouth is, I think we have seen a muscular stance across enforcement agencies in the US right now. We as civil society are sort of inspired by that, and I think we're seeing, I think Chair Khan in the previous session spoke about how, we are in diagnosis mode. I would almost say that diagnosis at this point is action insofar as there is structural obscurity in the AI market, and I think piercing through that it has a disruptive force, right? Even the question of what is the business model that is powering large-scale AI outside more profits for cloud companies is entirely unclear. And I think that this 6B study and other efforts internationally will be so useful just to really surface the business documentation around growth, market expansion, the resources needed for generative AI that I think help us get closer to that question. And almost, I think that question on what is the business model is very closely related to the question of what is AI innovation for public good. So are we just pouring dollars and increasingly public investment towards a trajectory, like a large-scale AI trajectory? Where is it going is, I think, really should be the key question.
We could go on, but having sat in this chair almost continually since 8:20 this morning, I need a glass of wine. So I think it is remarkable that at this late time, it's 6:20, there are still probably 300 people in this room. It's unprecedented. I know that there are there are 35 countries on the live stream. 35 different countries, people listening as we speak right now. So I wanted to say to everyone, thank you so much for coming. It's been, to me, a great learning and a joy to have the people I like on this panel. So join me in thanking this panel and more generally to just enjoy the day and have a glass of wine. Thank you. I think per americano,